Well, welcome again, everyone. My name is Kenneally from Copyright Clearance Center. I'm very happy that you can join us today for our annual town hall at the Frankfurt Book Fair. A Picasso, says Richard Smith, and a seer of science publishing declares science. One of the most important publishers of the last decade, according to Michael Eisen, Public Library of Science co-founder. A serial entrepreneur, an art collector, a mathematician, and a filmmaker. Vitek Tracz is all of these things and much, much more. Born in Poland in 1940 and educated in Warsaw, Tracz emigrated with his family to Israel when he was 21, before continuing on his life's remarkable journey to London, where he attended film school at the London Polytechnic and the Slade School of Art, and later studied art history. Today, Vitek Tracz is chairman of the Science Navigation Group. In 1998, he founded BioMed Central, which Springer acquired in 2008. As an independent house that published its first article in the year 2000, BMC grew spectacularly to become the largest open access provider in the world, with over 180 peer-reviewed journals in the biological and medical sciences. Over more than 35 years, Vitek Tracz has developed a number of innovative publishing projects. The Current Opinion series of journals in many areas of biology and clinical medicine that Elsevier acquired in 1997, as well as web-based projects including BioMed Net and the Investigational Drugs Database. His latest project is Faculty 1000, an open science publishing platform for life scientists that offers immediate publication and transparent peer review. Since its launch in 2013, F1000 Research has published around 1,500 articles across the life sciences written by 6,000 authors. Welcome, Vitek Tracz.
Thank you.
We're very happy you can join us, and very happy you could come back to the Frankfurt Book Fair. I understand you were a regular visitor of the fair for many, many years, but then you stopped coming some time ago, and now you're back. Is there a feeling of nostalgia?
Oh, it's wonderful to be back, yes. I have tears in my eyes all the time.
Well, we are also tearing up to have you back. We are very happy you could be here. I guess the question I would ask you to start is, are you surprised by what you see? Are you surprised to see us at all? Because so much of what you have been working on, particularly with BioMed Central, was really a way to upend the scholarly publishing system. Are you surprised to see where we are today in 2016?
No, I'm not surprised. Science publishing is vigorous and interesting and exciting and will continue for many years. I'm not at all surprised. I've never tried to upend anything. I just had some idea and tried to make it happen. I don't actually have some destructive ideas in mind.
Well, it certainly was disruptive, and I would take you back to the beginning of BioMed Central and ask you about your conception of it, because we want to remind people, this is a session we're talking about the entrepreneurial publisher, and we want to remind people just how entrepreneurial it was in 1996 and 97 to be conceiving of BioMed Central. It was a very risky venture.
Like many new ideas, it starts vaguely in a different way expected. The whole thing started, I visited David Lippman, who is the person who runs NCBI at NIH, and who is responsible for PubMed. He basically invented PubMed. Yes, at NIH. And we met for the first time. I actually came to complain because he was stealing programmers from us systematically and paying them double the salary. It was very awkward, and I tried to stop him doing that. And we were working on a loan and talking about what's happening. The basic realization, I was working with that idea for a while, was that, well, until now, where libraries needed copies of journals in their library so that the scientists working there could get to the papers. Now that one copy of a paper somewhere on the web is enough for everybody in the world, the whole idea of paying for subscriptions sort of stopped making sense. And I came and I said, look, why don't we make an experiment? You start a repository for articles, and I'll start publishing articles in this new way, and we'll just make them available free to everybody. And initially the idea was we'll just make it for free, and the whole thing will be a bit like preprint, just free, but it will be fully published articles. And initially he thought, no, it's not a task for us, and lots of other things are happening. But then about a month later he sent me an email saying I can't stop thinking about it, and then I came to visit him again, and we went to see Harold Varmus. Harold Varmus at the time was the head of NIH. And we told him this idea, and this was incredible. I never had this sort of experience with a man running such a gigantic organization. And we just told him the idea, and Harold just said, from today, this is the most important thing in my life. It was amazing. And we started working really hard of how to make it happen. And we started it for free. It had no business concept in it at all. The whole idea was completely motivated by what makes sense for science, and we didn't know whether it will make money or not make money, or what will happen. And on the same day, PubMed Central and BioMed Central started. I came up with both names. At the time, we were trying to think of various names, and then to survive, we realized we need to charge something, and the whole machinery of open access as a business model developed over a period of maybe a year, and then it lost money systematically in very large numbers for me for 10 years.
Well, I want to stick with that topic for a moment about the business model, because that was what was critical. As you say, you started with a goal that was to improve the distribution of science, and you got a partner in NIH, but you realized that eventually you couldn't keep on losing money. I'm thinking of the line in Citizen Kane about losing money, millions of dollars year after year, and perhaps it wasn't that kind of a figure, but it was a significant number. Okay. So that then led to the development of what we now know as the gold model, the gold road. Tell us how it was to sort of arrive at that conclusion, that there was going to need to be an article processing charge.
So the only model so when we realized that if we want to continue, we have to start having some income, the concept basically was from that point on, basically saying, instead of reader paying for the article, author could pay for the article, or rather, because neither reader nor author really pays for the things, it's some institutions or founders that pay for it, or governments. And science is a special sort of system because it's a closed system. There's a large number of people, and all of them are both writers and readers. And there is a process happening amongst them that they publish and read, and it sort of doesn't really matter at which point the payment is taken. The system has to pay for it one way or another, and so we said, let's try and see what happens, because if the payment is done at the beginning of the process, then there is the huge advantage that everybody can have access to everything. It's a really significant advantage to science and to society. And actually, it's also a really nice business model because you suddenly start getting the money at the beginning instead of the end. So we realized that something like that is happening. But I realized very early on when I started publishing that losing money is much more interesting than making money.
There's probably people here who understand exactly what you mean. But what do you mean by that?
It's much more enjoyable, and you're free to do what you like. This is not what stops you. Nobody checks you out. In fact, it's an incredible freedom, and so it worked out in practice, this basic idea that if you have an idea, don't be afraid, lose money for a while, and then as soon as something works, I sell. That's my method of survival. So I did it many times now, and I basically have some idea, I invest effectively, and I spend a lot. So I can tell you, BioMed Central was tens of millions of investment before it made a penny. And think, but every year the losses were slightly smaller, so the pleasure was little less. But it finally made it. But as soon as it started making money, I basically realized, that's it, this idea is now working, I don't need to do it anymore. And I sold it and went to what I'm doing now, which is sort of beyond open access, as it were.
Right, but just to stick with that again for one more moment, so as you say, you kind of left it once it started making money because it wasn't that interesting to you, but that's at the point where it became very interesting and very important to the rest of publishing, scholarly publishing, where they realized that they needed to take on board the open access model, the APC model.
Yes.
And they were pushed into that in large degree by the funders as well.
Completely the funders. So
and what's interesting to me is the whole process of developing BioMed Central has done something which is characteristic of the web, and that is to throw light across the entire workflow, if you will, and find players that were perhaps not so obvious in the past. So today, when we talk about scholarly publishing and open access, we talk always about the stakeholders, the funders, the authors, the institutions, and the publishers. They're all part of that discussion. And that's what happened because of BioMed Central.
You know, science publishing is interesting. It sits in the middle of science. Science can't happen without publishing. And we science publishers have an incredible responsibility. And in my opinion, for many years, we've just been doing a lot of damage to science. And the system which we operate now is a bad system. It's not a good system for science. My motives in all those things is, most of my friends are scientists. I'm not really a businessman, you know. I haven't got the faintest idea how to do business. And I don't know. I never read a balance sheet of profit and loss. I don't know what it means even. You know, I'm completely motivated by what seems to be good and worthwhile and useful. And then I hope to discover some route to survive it. And I think that's how all these ideas come. They don't come as business models, but they come from some belief that if it's really useful and appropriate, a business model will emerge. And it emerged in this case through APCs. But you know, by the time it started going in green and gold and things, until now, I'm not quite sure what they mean. I'm not interested in it. It's not.
But what you're describing is the path of the entrepreneur, and that's why it's so important to be speaking with you, Vitek Tracz. You describe a passion kind of gripping you. You have an idea that you can't forget about, and then you bring others into it who can't forget about it, and you pursue that idea. But when you say you're not a businessman, I'd argue with you a little bit. I think you understand very well how to establish scholarly publishing businesses. You've been very successful at it.
I am amazed that I was successful, you know, and I tell you many times, I was close to you know, being pushed to change profession quite a few times. I love science publishing because it's so important, because it's so much in the middle of science, because it can do so much good and it can do so much bad, and so much depends on us. And it's really interesting, and it's constantly changing. So it's really, really fun, but I think I was lucky.
Well, I want to ask you one last question, because we could continue, I think, for quite a lot longer. But the last question is this, sort of reflecting on not just the changes in publishing that BioMed Central has brought about, but really the social impact of that project. Have you thought about that very much, the social impact? Science publishing is spoken about today in a way that it was not before. It's on the news. It's in the headlines.
Is it?
I think so. I see it there. Certainly in the UK, that's true.
You know, there continues to be quite in life sciences, which is where I mainly work. There continues to be a real tension between scientists and publishers. And in general, publishing, scientists are very suspicious and have a complicated and problematic relationship with many publishers. And, you know, famously some of the big publishers are really difficult one. And the scientists feel that the publishers misuses their thing. But you know, the changes that did happen, open access would not have happened if we depended on scientists choosing that route rather than another. it completely depended on founders and organizations. In fact, librarians, the first real supporters of open science were librarians. Before anybody else, before founders got involved, librarians started paying for autos processing charges. When we came with the idea the first time, we actually asked people to pay. Librarians volunteered worldwide, many thousands of librarians volunteered. They say, we will use our library budgets and pay for articles that authors in our institutions want to publish. That's how it started. It was small numbers at the time, but they were doing it. And then, through discussions and things, founders suddenly realized this really makes sense for them. And they mandated. And without founders mandating, open access would not be here. It just simply would not happen. And it took many, many years at open access in early days of BioMed Central. We published next to nothing. It was unbelievably hard to persuade authors to publish that way. And only when founders started mandating and the government started getting involved that it changed. I didn't expect it, any of it, but that's how it happened.
Well, again, I think you're being very modest about that level of change, but I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate chatting with Vitek Tracz. Thank you.